Once all the panels are in place, remove all the spacers. Fill the spaces between the panels with mortar. Use a margin trowel to smooth it out and form a 3-inch wide band centered on the joint. For reinforcement, put fiberglass backerboard tape across each joint and firmly embed it into the mortar.
Cover the joints with additional mortar and smooth it with a trowel. Don't expose the tape, just feather the edges of the mortar.
Apply a coat of mortar to the edges of the countertop. Wrap them in fiberglass tape and apply a skim coat of mortar.
Once the mortar is dry, we're ready to mark our layout lines. We're going to be using edge tiles, but if you're using cap tiles, hold one of them against the front edge of the counter, mark the location of the back joint, and do the same at the other end of the counter. Snap a layout line between the marks. This will be your first joint line. If you're tiling an L-shaped counter, measure and mark the other leg as well.
Where the layout lines intersect will be the location of the first full tile. This will ensure full tiles along both front edges. Snap additional lines to divide the rest of the countertop into sections or grids.
Attach a 1x2 batten under the front edge of the counter to support the trim tiles, and you're ready to start setting the tile.
Using a square notched trowel, spread and comb an even layer of mortar along the edge of the counter up to the layout lines. Put 2 edge tiles in place next to each other and press them firmly into the mortar. If the mortar squeezes up between the tiles, the bed is too thick and the ridges need to be shorter. Lift up one of the tiles and look at the bottom. The mortar should cover the entire surface. If you see parallel lines, the mortar is too dry. If the ridges of the mortar have left solid lines on the tile, the mortar bed is too thin and you need to increase the height of the ridges. Remove both tiles, recomb the area you just tested, and reset the first tile. Twist the tile back and forth slightly to make sure that it's embedded in the mortar. Continue setting the rest of the edge tiles the same way.
Use a damp sponge to clean off any mortar that sticks to the top of the tiles before it dries, or you can carefully use a putty knife. To install your tiles, start at the intersection of the 2 original layout lines you snapped. Spread and comb thin set into the area.
Place a corner of the first tile at the intersection. Twist it back and forth slightly to embed it in the mortar. Continue setting the entire row of field tiles adjacent to the edge tiles. Once the first row is set, continue to work outward toward the back of the counter and around the sink. Use a damp sponge to clean up any excess mortar as you go. Set all the full tiles first and leave any cut tiles on the perimeter and around the sink for last. As you work, periodically check for flatness with the level. If you need to level any tiles, place a beater bar on top of the tiles and tap it lightly with a hammer or a rubber mallet.
To tile the backsplash, spread and comb mortar onto the backerboard, and then place the vertical tiles. To allow enough space for grout, set the tiles on 1/8 inch shims, or you can use spacers. If the backsplash is only a single row high, you can use bullnose tile to finish the top. We're using small pieces of cut tile to finish. Cut and back butter each piece and press it into place. Once all the tiles are set, we're ready to grout. If you're using unglazed tile on the countertop, seal it with penetrating sealer before grouting.
Grouting fills the space between the tiles. It's messy, so be sure to cover any areas you don't want to get dirty. Before you start, remove any excess mortar with a razor blade. Using a margin trowel, mix the powdered grout with liquid as recommended in the technique section. You have choices to make when choosing the grout color for a countertop. White grout will emphasize darker tile, but it needs to be regularly cleaned and sealed to prevent staining. Selecting a color that closely matches the color of the tile will help hide stains. If you're using a high glazed tile, which scratches easily, use a non-sanded grout. Apply the grout as described in the technique section. Skim off the excess grout with the edge of the float. To avoid digging into the joints, move the float diagonally across the tiles. The grout will set up in about 5 to 15 minutes and have a putty-like consistency. When a thumbnail pressed against it doesn't leave an impression, the grout is hard enough for the final cleanup. With a damp sponge, wipe the tiles diagonally to clean them. Rinse the sponge frequently in clean water. Remove any remaining haze. If you have trouble removing the haze, use an acid tile cleaner. Let the grout cure completely as recommended by the manufacturer. Once it's cured, apply a food-safe sealer with a sponge. Sealing gives the grout greater water and mildew resistance and helps keep it from getting dirty. Make sure to wipe off any excess within 10 minutes. Don't let it dry on the tile. Once the sealer has cured, the project's done.